Hello, and welcome to the On the Ground audio series with me, Rhea Pepper. I'm a fifth-generation cotton farmer out of West Texas and the co-founder and catalyst at Textile Exchange. We're a global nonprofit driving positive impact across the fashion, textile, and apparel industry, right from the very start of the supply network. I'm so excited to be with you today and to share our first ever On the Ground audio interview, where I speak with fiber farmers and producers all around the globe to voice their experiences, their challenges, and hopes for a better world. By sharing these stories, we want to help people understand where the materials that make our clothing and textiles come from and how they connect us to people, to places, to culture, to nature, to the land. In this first episode, I'm speaking with Patrick Brown, a fourth-generation farmer in North Carolina who recently added industrial hemp to his farm portfolio. He will tell us about hemp, his family's history of farming, as well as his hopes for the future, and how he's trying to do his part by responsibly farming the land through limiting synthetic inputs and increasing soil conservation practices. Patrick also co-founded the Connect Group, LLC, which advocates for the inclusion of minority farm ownership in agricultural legislation, one of his personal missions. So now, let's get to it. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. We're excited to have Rick here today. And Rick, when you look out your window, what do you see?
All right. When I look out my window every day, I see opportunity that God has given me and my family another chance to do better than what we did the day before, tackling tasks and accepting everything that's granted to us and know that it's not something that we should ever take for granted. So we want to make the best out of the most part of each day that God gives us.
That's amazing. And I really appreciate and resonate. So again, looking out that window at the land and being stewards of the land is so important. So talk about land. Where are you actually located?
We're located in Henderson, North Carolina. That is our physical address, but we are on the bordering county of Vance and Warren. So I grew up in the Warren County school system, and I always say that our land is basically in Warren County instead of Vance County, even though we have a Henderson address.
How very interesting. And so is that kind of rolling hills? Is it rain-fed? Is it irrigated? So what kind of farm do you have?
So we are on a very hilly setting of land structure. We have to focus on conservation for land erosion and be very careful of overhead irrigation so we don't lose our topsoil. So we have to be very focused on conservation focus on land and soil and erosion issues. So we sometimes based on drought, we have to utilize irrigation techniques.
That totally makes sense. So you know what, again, you're a fourth generation farmer. And so how long has your family been there? I'd love to hear a little bit about the history of your farm and kind of your roots and the journey to where you are today with your family farm.
Sure. So the section of our current farm that was passed on from the third generation is not where my ancestors originally started and lived in farming in Warren County, North Carolina. We're about 20 miles away from the original location of where my great-great-grandfather, Byron Brown, who was the first generation farmer, where he was enslaved, and after being enslaved, he became a sharecropper. So after the area of the sharecropping time frame up until his death in 1831, my grandfather, Grover Brown, utilized the land that he sharecropped and gained ownership of that. And it is the land that my father, the third generation farmer, farmed, and is where we farm today as the fourth generation.
So when you think about kind of where the history has come from, I know that's a lot that historically has been where a lot of tobacco has been grown. So what kind of crops has your family grown over the generations? And what kind of crops are you growing now?
So we were born and raised on tobacco crops. Those were our cash crop programs. That is what clothed us and fed us, and basically where I learned hard work. in agriculture and understanding how to cultivate, plant, and harvest burley tobacco, where we basically what we called it in the South is stick barn tobacco, where we put the tobacco leaves on a stick and allowed them to rot and harvest in the field and then hung them up in a smoke barn. And I grew up doing that from the 80s, 90s until we stopped with the burley tobacco in the early 90s, and what we transferred over to what we call cured tobacco, buck barn tobacco. And we currently, well, my father grew up until his retirement in 2002. He grew grain, which was wheat, sorghum, soybean, and row crop would be corn and tobacco. And I, up until his retirement, we grew tobacco probably up to 2016. And that was our last crop of tobacco for row crop. And that's when I focused on specialty crop production and looked into pesticide-free, herbicide-free programs, incorporated industrial hemp fiber, textile grain into our farming portfolio to be a diversified crop to help with soil improvements as well as fertility.
Was farming something that's, in your blood? Did you have dreams of doing something else, or is being on the farm and on the land always been your dream and in your blood?
It has always been my dream, and it's always been in my blood. Being born into that environment is something that comes first to nature. Like kids that don't grow up on a farm, they have to do chores around the house when they get back from school, like take out the trash or wash the dishes or clean their room. It was like a chore for us, for my sister and my brother. Growing up on the farm. So it's basically something that some people were rewarded and worked on the farm to pay. It was more for us, this was the only way that we could survive. So we didn't have a choice. And that hard work as a child wavered over me as an adult. And it allowed me to understand hard work, what it takes to be successful in life. And it gives you intestinal fortitude of how you can move forward in things that seem unaccomplishable, and it just makes me a great person in life, and I'm forever thankful of being able to be born and raised on a farm. I enjoyed it, and I still enjoy it to this day.
So when you see, like you said, you mentioned, starting to farm hemp, kind of what led you to looking at hemp as an opportunity, and kind of what was your learning curve there?
So when I first started growing hemp in 2015, it was more so focused on the medicinal side of retail market, because the market that we wanted to grow for, it was inexistent, and which was the fiber woven and unwoven market. It wasn't a market here in the US that we could identify to go straight into earning a potential profit for the scalability of the farm. So we focused on cultivation of industrial hemp CBD. And I was licensed in the state of North Carolina under the industrial hemp pilot program, so that the state can identify a possible new cash crop or specialty crop and a way that the state can earn tax revenue to bring in more agriculture expertise of a crop to the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is a $9 billion agricultural state. So it basically produces a lot of our income or GDP growth for the state. We have ventured a little bit out of the tobacco industry, more so now into the cotton, which has always been here, and other commodity crops, as well as now sweet potato. North Carolina is one of the number one exports of sweet potato to Europe. We have these crops, and we want to try to make industrial hemp one of those crops that the farmer can benefit from, as well as the state revenue. We knew what the crop could do to the land. And that's also what we focused on, is using less and less fertilization from synthetic processes. So one of my key agronomy avenues to incorporate industrial hemp fiber or medicinal industrial hemp into our diversified crop portfolio is to help lower the cost of inputs. It's hard to lower the cost on fossil fuels such as diesel if we can't create a biofuel product, which hemp can create that. But for right now, it's hard to lower that input cost, but it is even easier to lower the fertility synthetic rate utilizing a carbon-focused crop that has a 2 to 3 foot tap root that can mitigate the soil and add organic matter to the soil to allow us to regenerate the land. Our land had been of use of pesticides and herbicides for so many years. And it was my duty as the 4th generation steward to try to revamp that process of our land. So we focused on adding that crop into a rotational opportunity for our crops to be diversified. I said we started with the medicinal side. We grew medicinal CBD up into 2018 in a row crop or sun-grown setting. Now all of our CBD and medicinal plants are now indoor. Industrial hemp fiber and herd plants are grown in a row crop setting. And we're able to rotate that and add cover crops at harvest, which is also useful to our land, and it focuses on conservation. And we have a major market for textile production and herd production. And we have contracts that we have solidified for the last 3 years, which as a farmer allowed me to create my own contracts to be able to control the supply chain. This is one crop that can now allow farmers to control the supply chain, benefiting direct cost to us and an exchange of sharing profits at the retail side.
I'm really interested in what you're saying about regeneration of the land. So how many acres do you have in your farm, and what size is, like when you think about your acres of hemp and the rotation that is, what percentage of your land is in hemp this year?
So about 80% of my crop rotation is industrial hemp. That is what we now consider our cash crop. While we have 11 acres of produce, 9,000 square feet of indoor CBD and indoor produce, which is year round. And then we lease about 200 acres.
Well, that keeps you busy, certainly, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We're setting our farm up for future generations. My nephews now work with me on the farm, and they're the 5th generation land stewards, and we're just teaching them the principles of how to maintain this process for future generations.
Perfectly. So as you're doing this market access, it's really good. We'll dive into that just a little bit more. When it comes to, like you've talked about, minimizing and eliminating synthetic fertilizers and reducing like use of synthetic. So when you think about that and what you're doing as far as access to markets and things like that, are you certified to any specific standards, or what are some of those best practices? You've mentioned cover crops, you've mentioned, reduction and elimination of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, but when you think of best practices and things like that and being certified to a particular standard, is there anything that you're doing in that regards?
In that regards, according to our contracts at the moment, we're not certified organic in the process of cultivating, harvesting the industrial hemp plants. However, everything that we utilize is an organic or natural grown amendment. For example, all the products that we use are ORMI certified. We don't use synthetic fertility or any other amendments such as that. To eliminate weed pressure, we don't utilize pesticides. What we utilize are cultivation processes that allow us to terminate weeds by roller crimping. We don't utilize burn downs or anything like that. So we utilize our cover crops to suppress weeds and to add or maintain the fertility of the carbon, that organic matter that the hemp produced in the previous crop. And we terminate everything back into the soil by utilizing a roller crimping technique. After we have sown our new crop in, we roller crimp the covers down to lay over top of the dormant seed, so that when it germinates within 7 to 10 business days, we already have a layer of organic matter that is suppressing the weeds to allow the industrial hemp to suppress and move above the weed line.
So do you actually have visibility to where those, the hemp fibers that you're growing are ending up, and, the companies that you're working with?
At the moment, we don't have the visibility of where our hemp ends up on the retail side at the moment. That is something that we're working on as we are continuing to work with our processing company. Biofield Natural Fibers in Lumberton, North Carolina is the company that processes all of our industrial hemp. And Biofield are setting up contracts with retail brands to add inclusivity for the farmers, to show where the crop came from and what it took to grow that crop. So we provide data to the processing department that shares that data to the retail space that focuses on trial and genetics and varieties of industrial hemp that we use, soil content, organic matter created, the type of machines that we use to plant and harvest. All of that stuff is included in a process of inclusion of farming, which is the reason why we chose to work with Biofield Natural Fibers, because main and primary focus is to include a input on where the crop originated through the farmer.
When you think about what you're doing. You're very active. What do you feel like, your leadership is taking you to do as far as spreading the word, building a resilience, being a part of creating an environment where hemp can expand and be more of a crop that's available to farmers and, quite frankly, available to consumers?
Absolutely. Well, part of the company that I founded in 2013, the Connect Group NC LLC, is to focus on advocacy work and inclusion of minority farm ownership. Right now, we have lost so many acres of minority-owned land in North Carolina, and we want to make sure that we advocate for those landowners and future farmers of America. We visit quite often in Washington, D.C. and meet with our legislators to focus on when bills are created, that those inclusivity of minorities are included in those bills, so that we can create land structure and valuability to future farmers of America, especially the BIPOC-led organizations. So that is very important to me, to include advocacy in my agriculture setting and background.
It's so important to exercise voice and to be that voice. So I'm very thankful that that is a part of your game plan and a part of your stewardship practices. So when you think about the future of hemp, what is your vision a little bit of what you'd like to see as far as the future of hemp in the United States?
The education, appropriate education on the plant to understand what the value of the crop can bring to the infrastructure of the United States and where it is and what greenhouse gas improvements, climate change impact, carbon sequestration. Those things are what we can help the environment for future generations. For example, we're not here to take away from the forestry industry. We're here to add to the forestry industry. We're not here to take away from the cotton industry. We're here to add to the cotton industry, making the United States manufacturing as strong as it was in the 60s and 70s. We should not have to export or import products that we can make here in the United States. The United States on the manufacturing side is ideally behind the eight ball when it comes to construction to include industrial hemp products. We can change that by adding the value and education to corporate infrastructure. If corporate infrastructure and the Fortune 500 companies add value to their already existing supply chain with utilizing industrial hemp, we could grow jobs in the United States. We can create wealth for many generations going forward. So my main thing is to make sure that we educate what can be included in already existing structure by the inclusion of industrial hemp products. There are over 25,000 in-use products that can be made and added to an already existing supply chain of products that are already made in the United States. And it's my job as a farmer to try to educate those that do not know or that may not know where to find the information or the education, and to actually allow our farm to be a farm where they can come visit as a demonstration to see what we can improve current or already existing supply chains by analyzing and including this crop.
Amazing. So again, stepping back, get your crystal ball out. What is your vision for the future of Brown's Family Farms and your dreams and hopes for next generations when you look into that crystal ball?
My vision for Brown Family Farms is to add jobs to my county, to improve our GDP of jobs in the manufacturing space by having our own inclusive manufacturing facility that can possibly cater to over 25,000 end products throughout the world and not just here in the United States. We also want to create a space where young boys and girls can come learn agriculture, agronomy, horticulture by creating ways to offset the food insecurity supply chain that is currently happening in the United States and potentially globally. Teaching students a vocational side of agriculture that they can learn to be self-sustainable and be able to start small farms at their home on the countryside. So those are one of the two things that we look to evolve at Brown Family Farms, is to expand these principles into the future generations so that our farm and trust can be a farm that's not focused on commercial land, instead of making our land continue to be agriculture and non-residential.
It's so interesting to think about how we lay that future for our farmers and the ripple effect. It's about building life in the soil. It's about building life for that family on that farm. It's about building life for the community. You're talking about value added crops. It's taking that crop that's coming off your farm and making sure it turns into products and keeping that opportunity for wealth and health and thriving, resilient rural. So you are right in the center of what we want to see and a great example to inspire us all. So one last question as we bring our chat to a close. When you think about catalyzing action, what is your, call to action? What is the one thing that you would ask our community?
So my call to action as a farmer is to understand and to take a chance on including industrial hemp fiber in the same processes that it takes to make 100% wool blends by incorporating hemp into those products. We have a lot of cotton gins in the state of North Carolina that are going out of business. And those cotton gins can be transitioned into hemp processing warehouses where we could actually add a stronger market for the state of North Carolina to have a greater control on the fiber textile market for the United States, or higher demand for the textile fiber market in the United States, instead of exporting a lot of these blends or creating man-made like fiber blends, which don't last long. I feel that if we do this, a lot of the traditional herbicide and pesticide techniques, because cotton takes a lot to grow properly, there's not enough organic cotton farmers in the United States. And so I feel that this would be a way to increase that organic cotton production by also double cropping industrial hemp after cotton has been harvested. And we want to teach that as well. We are currently doing that with soybean, non-GMO soybean, where we grow industrial hemp fiber and we harvest it, and then we plant non-GMO soybean right behind it. And then we put cover crops in at that harvest of the soybean. So that gives farmers another profit market, potential cash market for their farm. And it also helps the land in the regeneration process. So that would be my call to action, is to give hemp a chance to be able to be useful in other diversified crop programs.